Also, I think the best thing would be if you do need to like glance at your notes. The main important part is just to like stay focused, looking straight into the lens, because that's your audience, so they feel like you're talking to them directly.
Okay. So what I'm thinking I'll probably do is, I do this anyway when I talk. I kind of look around. So
Okay.
I'll just try to make it look as natural as possible. Like,
Good
thinking.
idea. I like
All right, now I'm back. All right. Anything else you see?
You look good.
All right.
Yeah, great. So we're rolling.
All right.
Yeah, I don't think I need to start you off or anything. Pretty much.
You didn't bring the thing where you're gonna go? No, just like.
And actually,
Oh, thanks so much, Jan. And thanks to the Center for Creative Entrepreneurship at UT. As you've heard, my name is Sammetria Goodson, and I am so excited to speak with you guys again on behalf of UT for the second time this year. During a pandemic, I had the pleasure of being the 2020 COFA commencement speaker, and of course, now I'm visiting with you a part of this creative summit. So 2020 has been an unprecedented year. Says everyone who is grappling with our collective experience of ups and downs, sorrow, joy, constant change. For some people, that means slowing down, and for other people, that means ramping up. In addition to that, we've all bared witness to what could be described as the dismantling of life as we know it. For some, that means closing businesses, that means pivoting to other opportunities. For some, that means missing out on traditions and visiting family. For others, it's now time to come face to face with socioeconomic and racial caste-based systems, things that have undergirded our American way of life. But no matter the focal point, we can all agree that we've had to, in one way or the other, start over. So in continuation of part of my message from commencement, I'd like to share some thoughts with you all about the creative economy, the power of creativity. Also wanted to give you some tips or share my thoughts with you about what I would do if I were a student or if I were a creative entrepreneur. And also I have some examples of how artists are thriving during this pandemic. But first, a little bit about me. So I graduated at UT.
Sorry, I have an idea. Can we put this on the stand, like in front of her?
Okay.
So that way it's not as much.
As much?
looking down.
Okay.
You can like line it straight up with the camera.
I was also wondering, now that we've already gotten everything set up, how hard would it be? Have you ever mirrored your laptop with your iPad?
I haven't, but we can try to do that if that would help.
'Cause if we do that, like basically, it's pretty easy to connect if you want to put your laptop here, then I can control the scroll
Okay.
from the
Yeah, I can
iPad.
do that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry.
All right, let's start over.
Cool.
Cool. All right, Jan, thanks so much. I am so happy to be speaking to you guys today as a part of the Creative Summit. My name is Sammetria Goodson, and first off, I'm so excited to be working with UT College of Fine Arts for the second time during a pandemic. I had the distinct honor of being the 2020 commencement speaker for College of Fine Arts, and I am always excited about working with the University of Texas. So 2020 has been an unprecedented year. Says everyone who's grappling with our collective experience of ups and downs, any sorrows, any joy, any constant change. There's so many things that happen on a daily basis and an hourly basis that impacts our lives. In addition to all of that, we have bared witness to what we can describe as the dismantling of life as we know it. For some, this means closing businesses. For others, this means a complete disruption in their family life and spending time with family. For other people, it means working from home or schooling from home or Zooming from home, as we all have been doing. And then for other people, we are maybe collectively also dealing with and grappling with issues with social justice, issues with racial caste systems, and how those systems are sort of embedded into our American way of life. But no matter what your perspective is, there is one thing I think that we can all agree on, which is that in one way or other, we have all had to start over. So, in continuation of my message from the commencement address, I'd like to share some thoughts with you about the creative economy, share some examples of how creatives are thriving even during this pandemic, and also my thoughts on what I would do if I were a student or a creative entrepreneur. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I graduated from the UT College of Fine Arts in 2004. I also graduated same year with a degree in marketing from the Macomb School of Business. So I like to say that I studied the most creative of the business disciplines, which is marketing, and then I studied one of the most cerebral of the art disciplines, which is art history. From there, I took a job from my work at Macomb's, and I worked in Southern California for a while. Then I moved to New Jersey, where I worked in Jersey City and Parsippany, New Jersey, as well as New York. And then I landed in Philadelphia. And after living in Philadelphia for a bit, I decided to go to Temple University to go to law school. I gained some amazing experience during this time, including working for a judge, and I was in marketing and sales, and so I got to travel all over the country pursuing that. And I also, after law school, I was able to work for, like I said, a judge, and then also I did some plaintiff side litigation work, which means that I was in court every day. So all of these things were great, and then I decided to come back home to Texas, like a lot of Texans do, and worked for a small firm for a little bit, and then I started my own firm. My first office was here, where I'm speaking to you from, in Dallas, Texas, and I actually opened my Philadelphia office right before the pandemic. Now,
can you kind of sit up straight?
A little bit more. Okay.
And then just can you kind of tap that mic a little bit?
So that's all.
You are kind of like leaning.
Am I leaning for it? Yeah. I have my leg like balanced here so that I don't do that, because I naturally do that. Let me go back to that last. All right. After working for a firm for a short period of time, I decided to open my own firm, first here in Dallas, from which I'm speaking to you right now, and also Philadelphia. And actually, I opened my Philadelphia office right before the pandemic. But that's all about my academic and professional journey. So let me tell you about my creative journey, which started at home, like most of you. So I grew up in Houston, going to museums and attending performing arts events with my family. My mother spent a lot of time with me on Saturdays and at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, my beloved Children's Museum in Houston, as well as the library downtown. And frankly, we had a life that was inundated with art, but it wasn't necessarily because we had a huge art collection or because we had a box at the symphony. It was more so my mother making sure that my brother and I were able to experience the art and the fruits of creativity in Houston. And indeed, I was surrounded by art. And a lot of that was because I grew up with creatives and makers. Now, they didn't call themselves creators and makers, but they certainly were. So my mother loved arts and literature. My father was a playwright and a screenwriter, filmed a feature-length film. My brother studied sound engineering. My great-grandmothers pursued what we know as fashion design, and they were also pattern makers. I even had a great-grandfather who was a sculptor, but his medium was tombstones. So all of these folks didn't call themselves artists, they didn't call themselves creators. That was not in their vernacular in terms of their creative pursuits. but they felt blessed to be able to pursue their interest, and they certainly were, considering the time that they came along and they were doing those things. So, grew up surrounded by art, and all throughout school, I took art classes and did many of the things that some of the folks who are attending the summit, particularly the students in COFA, did. But I struggled, though, with making art a part of my passion. It was a part of my life, but it wasn't necessarily something that was a part of my being, the thing that made me wake up in the morning. And so what I did was I basically started to pursue what I thought was a more practical route, which was to find every opportunity to pursue the creative side of business. And what I mean by that is I took every opportunity to turn business internships into art internships, and then vice versa. And once I figured out that I could chart my own course, my creative journey went into overdrive. And I can't necessarily put this moment, this aha moment, into words, but all creatives know that feeling, right? It's when you find that note, it's when you have that one brushstroke, you catch the light the way that you like. It's that moment in time where whatever you're doing from a creative standpoint, even if you're pursuing creativity through business, that what was intangible becomes tangible. And that's what I experience on the campus of UT literally every day, running back and forth between COFA, the College of Fine Arts, and the Macomb School of Business. So to give you an example of the creative journey, even in finding my place, right? Finding a way to marry art and business, I pursued internships on campus, such as internships with the Daily Texan, where I worked with the marketing department, shout out to the Daily Texan, and I worked with the graphic designers there, and as well as the advertising team, and our goal was to increase the readership. And I also interned at the UT Performing Arts Center on campus, again in the marketing department, and the goal there was to increase the student attendance at events. So again, this is this process of pulling these various aspects of art and business together. And I did that pretty strategically all throughout my time at UT with the goal of pulling together art and business. So my job right out of college was not necessarily art related, but my proximity to artists helped me understand some of the problems that they face, particularly the problems with sustainability. And definitely when I was in Philadelphia, which is a city that is sort of teeming with creative entrepreneurs, it became more poignant in terms of the types of issues that artists face and how that negatively impacts their work. So over the course of time, I decided to go to law school with the bizarre goal of studying art law. I say it's bizarre because at the time, that field of practice was just trust and estates, it was tax, it was folks who were lawyers for the major foundations. There wasn't really too many people doing what I do now, which is practicing art law in a way that it serves as the foundation for art and creativity and creative entrepreneurship.
Pause.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to let them know we're recording.
Oh.
In case they didn't. Excuse me. I'm sorry. We're recording in here. So.
How do you feel?
Sorry.
Good, how's it sound?
Sounds good. This is a lot to like,
Thank you.
it's a lot to like,
To say,
you want
yeah.
to keep going, so I think you're, yeah, you're going pretty good there.
Trying to pause. Do I need to roll back on some of that?
Might be nice.
Okay. Let's start. Okay. So my job right out of college was not directly related to art, but my proximity to artists and creatives certainly helped me to understand all of the issues that artists and creatives face, and the main issue is sustainability. So there's business issues for sustainabilities, and there's certainly legal issues with sustainabilities. So over the course of time, I actually decided to go to law school with the, at the time, bizarre goal of practicing art law. And I say it was bizarre because At that time, art law was mostly trust and estates attorneys. It was tax attorneys, folks who were supporting the major foundations, but not so much folks who were interested in doing what I do now, which is helping creative entrepreneurs set the foundation for their businesses, and I help these businesses grow. So there I was again in law school, having to chart my own path. And then the task was to marry not just art and business, but art, business, and law. So I did what I did at UT. I just took every opportunity to turn every legal internship into an art internship. So that included things such as working with the real estate department at the...
Can you start with working with the real estate department?
Okay.
Because there's like the door.
The door, yeah, I can hear it too. I'm like, no, stop. So that included working with...
All right. Good.
So that included working with the real estate division of the Philadelphia City's Attorney's Office. And I was working with the real estate division because they supported the Art Commission. That also included going all the way to Nashville, Tennessee, where I worked in the general counsel office for a record company. And I focused there with trademark and other copyright issues related to record labels. So in addition to serving my clients, bringing it back to where we are now, and in addition to working with my law firm, I'm also rediscovering my own creative practice. And it would take way longer than the time that we have together today to talk to you about how I rediscovered that love for my own work. But essentially, I've discovered that surface design is my own artistic medium. And I discovered this really through looking through old sketchbooks that I had from UT, in my days at UT. And what I noticed with those sketchbooks, and then even some materials that I had from growing up, that I was obsessed with gestures, obsessed with lines and geometric forms, and that beyond just making these gestures or making these, sorry, let me start over.
Let me make an adjustment.
Okay. I can see you looking for people going in and out of the door. I can see like over the mask, your eyes are like, stay away from the door. All right, let's go back here. All right, let me go one more up. Yeah. All right. So fast forward to current time. I told you that I have a law firm where I represent artists and creatives, but I'm also pursuing my own artistic practice. And the creative journey of how I discovered this is way longer than the time that we have together today. But let's just say that it started with me going back and taking a look at my sketchbooks from my time at COFA, as well as other materials that I'd sort of carried with me all over the country every time I've moved. And what I found is that I'm essentially obsessed with hash marks and gestures and geometric forms, and then beyond making these forms, whether it be through watercolor or even digitally, I like organizing all of these things into patterns. And so what I've been pursuing is surface design, and it's just been wonderful, right? It's that moment that I spoke of before, that creative spark, the moment where you're doing something else even, and then you get inspired to go in another direction. So I'm happy to say that I will be working on my first commission piece for fabric that some friends of mine will be using in their renovation. So that's a part of my creative journey. Now, why did I share all of that with you? I'm sharing this with you to press the point that there is a world of opportunity for you out there. And half the time you have to chart your own course to pursue these opportunities, and that can feel lonely at times. But once you harness creativity as like the force that is pushing you through whatever it is that you're interested in, you can do all sorts of things, including run a law firm and pursue surface design. So I told you that I would talk to you about the creative economy. And that's one of my favorite topics. So not only do I represent artists, creatives, entrepreneurs, and all of those folks, but now you've learned that I'm also pursuing my own creative entrepreneurship journey. And that means that I'm both a service provider in what is known as the creative economy, as well as a producer in the creative economy. So what is the creative economy? Well, first of all, the creative economy is a thing in that there are economists, there are NGOs, there are analysts, there are all sorts of folks all over the world who are studying the fruits of creativity and how that impacts economic policy and how that impacts economics at a national or an international, national, and local level. So really it's the macro view of things. Whenever I'm working with a client, the first thing I try to talk to them about is where they fit in the macro view. You could think of it as the Google Earth view or the drone view of creativity. Oftentimes creatives are just in front of the computer, or they're behind the camera, or they're in their studio. And sometimes they don't realize that swirling around them is an entire economy, and that there are a lot of folks who are studying these economies because they've realized that there's an economic impact to creativity.
If you hear the door slam, can you start the
One
sentence
over.
before?
Yeah.
And read it.
Okay.
I think I got a little lost, so is that good?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with, okay. The creative economy is measured worldwide. So there are groups such as the National Endowment of the Arts, there is the Bureau for Economic Analysis, there's also the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what these groups are doing is, again, studying and measuring economic output. In Texas, there's groups such as the Business Council for the Arts, that's based in North Texas. What they're looking at is the economic impact of creativity at the local level. And there's certainly universities and schools all over Texas who are doing the same thing. So what I wanted to do was to read a quote from you from the National Endowment of the Arts. So pause. I actually wanted to read the quote. Would it make sense for me to look at my iPad and do it, or do you want me to just read it straight off? I can pause and look down.
Could you restate the statement? Say, I actually wanted to cite a quote for you instead of saying you're going to read it.
Okay.
Then you can just say it.
Okay.
Oh, I see what you mean. You have to look there the whole time to read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can kind of paraphrase it, but
Also,
I don't know if you wanted me to like have my iPad and like pretend like I'm looking at it, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
We could do two. We could do both.
Okay.
So you have something to work with.
Yeah. So let's start with the one where you're just reading it from there.
From there?
Just
Okay.
looking at it.
All right. So I want to cite something from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Americans for Arts organization. And this is what they say. As the business landscape shifts and evolves, it's no secret that millions of Americans are pursuing income streams that are based in creative pursuits. Artists, creatives, makers continually seek to do their work, choosing to work with both businesses and nonprofit arts groups. This results in an ever-blurred line between independent and private sectors. The result is a complex ecosystem of industries, educators, resource providers, and participants that centers around creativity. All right,
That's fine. No, we don't need to do it where you're holding it.
okay, that's fine. All right. So this is one of my favorite quotes and favorite citations from the Americans for the Arts, because there's a couple of key things that they point out. So if you heard me say, they were explicitly talking about things such as business impact. They were specifically talking about the private sector versus the independent sector in the business landscape. So the point of this is that the National Endowment for the Arts and Americans for the Arts, groups that work specifically to advocate on behalf of artists, are directly connecting business, economic impact, as well as the impact that has on independent artists and their ability to sustain themselves. So I think that's pretty groundbreaking for one of the top organizations and think tanks in the US to explicitly bring together this idea of creativity in art. So I want to add some numbers to that, just to give you an idea. So arts and cultural production in the United States in the year 2016 amounted to $804 billion. So that's billions with an S. And that was about 4.2% of increase over the previous year. So independent artists themselves and performers, they added a combined $22 billion to the US economy. That's also a 2016 number. And in Texas, about 29.3% of adults surveyed mentioned that they work to create artworks and that they promote artworks, and that's a number from 2018. And then in the North Texas area, from the study completed by the Business Council for the Arts, they identified about 52,000 full-time jobs that were associated with art and cultural production. If you were to go to look up the creative economy, you were to Google that, you would go and you would find a lot of information out there about it. So folks have been studying the creative economy for a while. Hopefully some of you guys attending the summit, this may have been the first time that you've even heard that term, but it's definitely something that economists are looking at. And in addition to that, the creative economy is so robust that economists are now looking at what is being termed the new creative economy. So what does that mean? The new creative economy is a subset of folks who are independent makers or creators, meaning they don't work for other people, they work for themselves. And the latest study showed that in 2017, this represented about $6.8 billion alone in revenue and profit generated by these independent creators. Now, the other main thing is that the folks in the new creative economy are using tech-enabled and web-based platforms. So who are those folks? Those are the animators, the illustrators, the graphic designers, the photographers, the videographers, the YouTubers, the IGers, the folks who are using Twitch, eBay, Amazon Publishing, all of those guys, and visual artists and writers and brewmasters and Airbnbers, and all of these folks are considered to be a part of the creative economy. This is important, again, because it gives you a macro.
I'll start at this is important after the doors.
This is important because it gives you, again, that macro Google Earth drone level viewpoint of where perhaps you sit in this economy. So it's not just about you in front of your laptop or behind the camera or in your studio. It's about you as a participant in a worldwide economy. So how does this translate on the ground? Well, my day-to-day job is to protect artists and creatives and all of those folks as they pursue the foundations of their organizations, whether those be single-member LLCs, artist collectives, multi-income stream entrepreneurs, as well as artist corporations. These creatives are increasingly seeing themselves as business people, and they're going after all sorts of opportunities. I work with artists who are self-represented and also artists who are represented by agencies. I work with artists who work with galleries, art galleries, and I work with galleries who are on the cutting edge of even rethinking what the art gallery space should be. And I will say they've had plenty of opportunity as gallerists in the midst of COVID-19 to rethink the gallery space. I also work with agencies that represent artists, and these agencies are negotiating deals with multinational corporations, international corporations on behalf of artists. So these are the types of opportunities, and this is the type of work that was going on before the pandemic, that's going on now during this pandemic, and that I've actually seen an uptick in as we move throughout the rest of 2020. The other thing that I'm seeing is that there are a lot of multi-hyphenate artists who are not only working across disciplines, but they're also segmenting their product and service offerings by using licensing. So what they're essentially doing is they're monetizing different aspects of their portfolios and what they make as a creative, and they're segmenting those out across various industries. From the large brand perspective, let me start again. From the large brand perspective, it's no secret that companies and brands are reaching out to artists because they're seeking to work with creatives. Whether it's someone hiring a muralist to create art for art's sake or to create art for Instagram's sake, these are the types of opportunities that I'm seeing various artists take advantage of during this pandemic. And I've also seen an uptick in collaborations with artists, and to be perfectly honest, some of these deals are pro artists and are helpful to artists in their long-term sustainability, but some of them aren't. All that means, though, and nevertheless, is that there are opportunities out there. And so the more artists think about themselves as creatives in the creative economy, who are businesses, the more these opportunities open up for them. Let's go to the next one. And to that end, what I see almost every day is the monetization of creativity. And creativity is monetized through the use of intellectual property. So intellectual property, or IP for short, protects essentially the fruits of creativity. You have four main types. You have trademarks, you have copyrights, you have patents, and you have trade secrets. And using these elements of IP and therefore protecting these elements of IP is the main driver to, in my opinion, the economic economy. So what I mean by that is if you look at some of the top brands, no matter what industry they're in, the majority of the value and the valuation of their company is wrapped up in their intellectual property. So again, you as a creator, even if you're a painter, painting canvases, or a photographer who's taking photographs, one of the things that I want you to understand is how important that is in terms of the value of the work that you produce for clients. They use that information to be able to support their brands, and I would even tell you that when companies are pursuing their trademark applications, they actually have to submit evidence of their usage in the marketplace, and a lot of that evidence is produced by creatives and creative entrepreneurs.
Pause. Okay.
All right, let's go. Can you go up to, yeah. Oh, go up, yeah. Oh wait, go the other direction. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. For multi-hyphenate creatives, this means, again, segmenting their various forms of IP and building sustainable art practices from this segmentation. For example, I represent an artist duo who's a band. They're videographers or copywriters, they're writers, they're photographers, and what they've done is that they've segmented all of these various aspects of their businesses into different LLCs, and they're protecting their IP, which includes, I might add, copyrights for music. And of course, if there's copyrights for music, then eventually there'll also be royalties. So this is an example of a duo, a team who's working together to provide all sorts of creative services. But what they're doing is they're doing it in a way that segments out the legal risks with operating these companies across the board, and they're also protecting their IP. All right, go to that last part. Okay. So the point of me sharing that example with that creative duo is to press this point. Once you grasp intellectual property and the value of intellectual property, you can build more resiliency into your art practice, and you can negotiate better deals, and you can create sustainable practices. Now, as you can tell, I can talk about this subject all day, but as we come to a close for this summit, I do want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. So, if I were a student right now, I would go to every summit, as you are attending this summit, workshop, panel discussion, any and everything that you can get your hands on, any information or anything that you can attend that discuss the business side of the arts would be a worthwhile investment on your part. That even goes for my art history students. And I say that because sometimes it's the art history students who don't necessarily think that they need to understand the business side of the arts because they see themselves as curators or see themselves working with arts organizations. Well, I will share with you that I represent curators who are independent curators, so they're out monetizing their creativity, they're curating shows, they're being hired by both museums, institutions, as well as corporations actually, to curate shows in their spaces. So these are curators who are independent curators, and they're out there providing creative services, and they're business people. So any student right now that has any interest in art and creativity and making that not just your job, but making it also your life's work, understanding the business aspects of art and creativity would serve you well. Okay. If I were a student, the second thing...
Are we doing the question and answer now, or is this still the keynote?
Oh, these are just still the keynote.
Okay.
Yeah, I have the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a thought about the lead-in to the question.
Okay.
Could be, like at the end of your keynote, you can say something like, you know, with all that said, I would like to open it up to questions.
Okay.
And then I think we're gonna kind of like reenact the idea of like, okay, like you actually see you holding the iPad.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a question, and then you just say, read the question out loud,
Mm-hmm.
and then.
And then go from there. And I have one of the questions actually in the form of a video, which I have in my notes. I don't know if playing the video makes a difference. It's really short. It's like a couple seconds, but I'll show it to you so you can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
We probably won't play the video in the live stream.
Okay.
Because it might be weird that way, but at least we'll have that option.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. All right. So if I were a student, the second thing that I would do is completely step out of agreement with the notion of the starving artist. So my clients are not starving artists. They are able to support themselves and their families, pay off their student loans, buy homes, do all of the things that you would normally do with a, quote, job. And they are able to do this because they simply won't agree with the idea of being a starving artist. So one of the best things that you can do, the best favor you could do as a student that's interested in art, creativity, in pursuing those things as a passion, is to just completely disavow yourself of the thought of being a starving artist. If I were a creative entrepreneur right now, I would take this time to not only plan, but to get my artistic house in order. So what do I mean by that? As you may remember at the beginning of our summer here in 2020, there were many different areas of relief, things that people could maybe avail themselves of from a business perspective in order to stay afloat during the pandemic. Well, if you applied for any of these programs, you may have noticed that most of the questions they were asking were the types of questions that CPAs answer, or they're the types of questions that need to be answered if you have a formalized business structure. So including working on your current projects and trying to stay afloat, one of the things that you can do is kind of set your foundation as a creative entrepreneur and get everything sort of set, and I call it getting your artistic house in order. The other thing that you may look at is restructuring your businesses. You also may look at establishing policies and procedures that you can use moving forward. And I would say the last thing I would do as a creative entrepreneur is to start running what I call blue sky scenarios. These are the scenarios that you think about if everything was perfect, you had all the resources, completely opposite of the pandemic that we're in right now. But the point of the blue sky scenario is that what I found with working with creatives is if you set a set point for the amazing, awesome thing that you'd like to happen, you'd be surprised at how you'd be able to sort of back into that actually happening. The other thing is, once you set a point way in the horizon for what you'd like to accomplish, then you can more clearly see what you need to do from a business perspective or even a legal perspective to help you get there. One example that I want to share with you of this is an artist that I work with who is a classically trained artists, meaning they went to art school, they have the art degree. But this particular artist is very business minded. During this pandemic, this artist has taken a look at their inventory, and that's the term that they use, inventory, of work that they have. They've taken a look at all of their collectors, and they've started to segment out their inventory with the specific collectors that they have sold to in the past, and they've developed marketing plans to increase sales for their work. This particular artist has also taken a look at what's happened with the shutdown of galleries and the shutdown of art fairs, which was a major source of interaction with collectors, and they've decided to take a look at their work and to figure out ways to add technology and to infuse technology into their work. So I can't speak that much more about it because it's under wraps and it's confidential, but have had a blast working with this particular client to not just protect their IP, but what's been amazing is to see this classically trained painter dive headfirst into blue sky scenarios of what they want. And they've worked directly with collectors to do some things that are amazing. So this is just one example of an artist who sees himself as a business person who's taking what could be considered a very standardized area of art practice, which is painting, and they've taken it into overdrive. Their sales have increased more than double during this pandemic from those efforts. And in conclusion, that's my major tip for any creative and really how I want to conclude my time here with you guys during this creative summit. Creatives are future focused. Creatives try new things, new techniques. Creatives look for opportunities. Creatives also hunker down in their practices, and frankly, they're used to dealing with blank canvases. And that takes me back to the point that I made at the very end of my commencement speech earlier this year, which is that creatives are uniquely gifted and talented and positioned to deal with uncertainty, with rapid fire change, every single thing that we have experienced during this pandemic. Do what you always do, which is create something out of nothing. Thank you. All right, and then let me cue up the other.
Could you just do what you do, or do what you always do, create something out of nothing?
Okay. Do what you always do, create something out of nothing. Thank you. Better? Cool.
It's a problem if you work with somebody multiple times, then they know when it can be better.
Better.
I guess you don't need me cynical anymore, huh?
Thank you,
Sit
Lisbeth.
in a regular couch for a minute. How are you on your water and stuff since you're drinking?
Yeah, I gotta have a swallow. All right.
Okay, give me one sec. So yeah, so with that, and so hold it down for a second,
Okay.
and then say, basically like looking, can you like face camera a little bit more? Yeah. So, and then essentially we're looking for a lead in from the end of the keynote that is gonna say something like, and with all that said, I would like to open it up to questions from the live stream. So if everybody can send me, if you have any questions, go ahead and comment on the.
Oh, okay, you want me to tie it into the live stream? Okay.
So basically, like it's a call to action to have people like
Have
send
people
in their
send.
questions,
Okay.
and then we'll see what comes in, and then you can be like, so what's it? Okay, so all right, so here's a good one, and then see it and the answer, and then you can hold it down. So it's just being used as a problem to like.
Oh, okay. So like, here's the question, and then
Yeah.
okay. All right. All right. With that being said, we will open it up to some questions from the live stream.
So and then say. So go ahead and comment if you have any questions.
Oh, send the
Also
questions.
come in and
Okay.
answer it.
Okay. And so with that, we will take some questions from the live stream. So go ahead and send in your questions and we'll see what we get.
Go ahead and hold it up higher.
Go higher. All right. So the question is, what is an easy way to protect work? Well, let me say it again.
The first question is.
Okay.
So first question is.
Okay. That's right. All right, let's see. So the first question is, what is an easy way that creatives and entrepreneurs can protect their work from theft? This is a good question. I get this all the time, but I'm going to reframe it a little bit as lawyers do. So the idea isn't necessarily that you want to protect your work from theft. The idea is that you want to reduce the likelihood of copyright infringement. So most of the time when folks come to me and say, hey, someone's stolen my work, what they mean is that they've put the fruit of their creativity, whatever it is, out possibly on a digital platform, and they've noticed that someone is using that work either without giving them credit, which is attribution, or most likely without paying them anything. And so they come to me and say, hey, someone has stolen my work. They stole my work. There's been a theft. And so what I say is what I just said to you, that it's really a matter of reducing the likelihood that someone will infringe on your copyrights or infringe on your work. And there's a couple ways to do that. So one of the ways that you can do that is to make sure that whenever you transfer files, for example, be them high resolution images, which you want to only do with a watermark or some other feature, but whenever you transfer any sort of file, you want to have it password protected. That is an easy way to reduce the likelihood of copyright infringement because you put a barrier between yourself and someone who may be trying to take your work. And so to piggyback on what I just said about watermarks and copyright signs, whenever you do upload something online, you want to make sure that you have your name, your logo, something that's actually on the clip of the work or on the photograph itself, whatever the image itself, because what you are doing is putting the world on notice that you're asserting your copyright ownership over that work. It's one more barrier. It's something that creates an extra step for someone to go through if they want to take your work. I would say the third thing, and this requires a little bit more effort, is you really just want to be careful with who you share things with. And if you are submitting proposals or if you're working with folks and they're asking you to share information with them, you can do so, but you might want to put a little disclaimer, which is what I call an NDA light. What that means is you say, okay, I'll share these images with you, I'll share this work with you, but understand that I'm asserting my copyright protection in the work, and any use of the work without a license is copyright infringement. So that's a way to reduce the likelihood of copyright infringement with your work. All right, let's take a look at another question.
Hold it up higher.
All right, here's one. Here's number 2. What are some things that content creators should be aware of when approaching companies for deals and sponsorships? Another good question. I often get this question right in the middle of a deal or a negotiation. So folks will have a contract that's sent to them and they want me to review it, and so they kind of ask a similar question. So this is what I would say. One of the main things that you want to be aware of as a creative, especially if you're working with a large company or a party on the other side that has more power than you or more resources than you, you want to keep in mind that you may talk to the business people and you have one deal, but by the time it gets to the accountants and the lawyers, there's going to be some terms in there that are very pro the third party or the other side and not necessarily pro artist. So sometimes in working with these major corporations on sponsorships and deals, the creative doesn't realize that the other party is negotiating in their best interest even if the business people are addressing the project as some sort of collaboration. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I would say the other thing with working on deals and sponsorships is that the terms are negotiable. So oftentimes what creatives will do is they'll get super excited because some big brand name company has reached out to them, and they will accept the terms without even looking. It's very dangerous because you want to, at minimum, make sure that you understand who owns the copyright in your work. But beyond that, you want to take a look at the terms to make sure they make sense. So one of the things that I see often that artists and creatives do is they conflate or confuse the difference between selling their copyrights to their work and licensing the copyrights to their work. So the difference is, if someone wants to license your work, that's usually at one price point. If they want to purchase your work, that's at a different price point, which is typically higher than a license agreement. So what I'll see is creatives and artists, again, excited to be contacted by the big company, and they just simply forget that they can actually negotiate some of the terms. All right, so let's take a look at another question.
This is the last one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you start out and say, all right, last question. One more question.
All right, so one more question. Should creators be worried about content ownership rules of emerging platforms like TikTok? And they added that TikTok has the right to use your likeness in advertising. Another great question. I would say that there's so many platforms. I'm actually learning about different platforms, I feel like, on a daily basis. And all of them do have their own terms of service and terms of use policies. So one of the first things you want to do if you want to use these platforms is make sure you hover over to, it's usually at the bottom of the page, hover over to the terms of service and make sure you understand what their requirements are for copyright ownership. And then you also want to see what their procedure is for copyright infringement. So it's a well-known fact that there are some platforms that are more helpful when there's issues with copyright infringement. There are some platforms like YouTube where if you follow their procedure, they'll actually take down the allegedly infringing work. There are other platforms that don't necessarily operate that way. So you just want to make sure you understand their policies and how they deal with content. The other thing I would add is that when it comes to the legal landscape, sometimes the law is a little bit behind what's actually going on the ground. So there aren't any special copyright rules, if you will, that apply to these platforms. So if something were to happen in terms of copyright infringement, most lawyers like myself would take a look at precedent. They would take a look to see what courts have decided in the past about copyrights in these various environments. I would say what's happened with the digitization of music is a good framework for maybe how a court would respond to the issues of copyright infringement on some of these other platforms. But my point is that you want to take the steps to protect yourself on these platforms instead of necessarily relying on copyright infringement law or any other thing like that to protect you in these environments. Thank you.
So then maybe like a closer, I hope all these answers, set you off on the right path, and good luck on your creative journey or something like that.
Okay. Well, I've certainly had a good time visiting with you guys and participating in this creative summit. I hope what I said before, as well as the answers to these questions, help you on your creative journey and the next step that you're going to take. Thank you. Oh, and hook 'em.